The city of Cytherian was alive with energy as dawn broke over its towering skyscrapers. The neon lights dimmed slightly, giving way to the golden rays of sunlight that painted the streets in warm hues. For Kale, however, the morning carried a different kind of light, one that shone not from the sky but from within him. He had done it. 3 acts of selflessness had quieted the echo gauntlet, silencing the haunting hum that had tormented him for weeks. But the real victory wasn't freedom from punishment. It was the change he felt inside. Still, Cal knew his journey wasn't truly over. Commander Vera's words echoed in his mind. Use them wisely. She hadn't just lifted the curse, she had entrusted him with a responsibility to carry forward the lessons he'd learned, and Cal intended to honor that trust. Final challenge. Cal's peace didn't last long. Just as life seemed to settle into a rhythm, chaos erupted once again. A group of violent rebels, those who opposed the monarchy outright, began attacking key locations across the city. Their goal was clear: overthrow the government and dismantle the system entirely. They claimed to fight for justice, but their methods were brutal. Innocent civilians were caught in the crossfire, their homes destroyed, their lives shattered. One evening, as Kel closed up his workshop, he heard explosions in the distance. Thick plumes of smoke rose above the skyline, signaling another attack. Panic spread through the streets as people fled for safety. Kel hesitated for a moment, torn between staying out of trouble and stepping in to help. Then he remembered the boy he had saved from the rubble, the family whose heater he had repaired, the rebels who had trusted him enough to expose corruption. These were the people he had vowed to protect, the ones who deserved better than fear and destruction. If he wanted to prove his redemption, this was his chance. Grabbing a toolbox filled with makeshift gadgets, Kel ran toward the commotion. Along the way, he encountered a group of rebels planting explosives near a civilian housing complex. Without thinking, he shouted, "Stop! There are families inside." The rebels turned to face him, their faces masked and weapons drawn. One of them sneered, "Stay out of this, mechanic. You don't understand what's at stake." "I understand plenty," Kel replied, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "You're no better than the people you claim to hate if you hurt innocent bystanders." For a moment, no one moved. Then one of the rebels lunged at Kale, swinging a metal pipe. Kale dodged just in time, grabbing a nearby piece of scrap metal to defend himself. The fight was messy and chaotic, but Kale used his wits instead of brute force. Using tools from his kit, he disabled several of the rebels' weapons, buying enough time for others to intervene. As reinforcements arrived, both Black Royal Guards and concerned citizens, the rebels retreated, leaving behind their explosives. Kale helped disarm the remaining devices, ensuring the building was safe. When the dust settled, cheers erupted from the crowd that had gathered. People clapped and thanked him, calling him a hero. But Kale shook his head. "I'm not a hero," he said firmly. "I'm just someone trying to do the right thing." Commander Vera's approval. Later that night, Kale found himself summoned to the Citadel. He walked through its grand halls nervously, unsure what awaited him. When he entered the throne room, he saw Commander Vera standing beside the monarch, a regal figure cloaked in shimmering robes. Her helmet was off, revealing a face marked by wisdom and strength. For the first time, Kale saw her not as an untouchable enforcer, but as a person. The next morning, Kale woke up feeling uneasy. The humming sound from the night before lingered in his mind like a distant echo. He tried to shake it off as he got ready for work, telling himself it was probably just stress or a lack of sleep. But deep down, something felt wrong. When he entered his workshop, the first thing he noticed was the mess. Tools were scattered across the floor, even though he had left everything neatly organized the night before. His workbench was covered in scratches, as if someone, or something, had dragged sharp claws across it. "What the hell happened here?" Kale muttered, scratching his head. He looked around the room, half expecting to see signs of a break-in. But the door was locked, and there were no broken windows. Everything seemed intact except for the chaos inside. He shrugged it off, assuming he must have forgotten about cleaning up after a late-night project. "Get a grip, Kale," he said aloud, trying to convince himself everything was fine. Still, a nagging voice in the back of his mind whispered that something wasn't right. As the day went on, things only got stranger. Kale started working on a repair job, a hoverbike brought in by one of his regular customers. It was a routine fix, nothing complicated. But when he turned the bike on to test it, sparks flew out of the engine, nearly setting his shirt on fire. He jumped back, heart pounding, and cursed under his breath. "This doesn't make any sense," Cal grumbled, inspecting the wiring. There was nothing visibly wrong with it. In fact, the connections looked perfect, better than he remembered leaving them. Yet the bike refused to start properly, sputtering and jerking like a wild animal. By the time he finished fixing the hoverbike after several more attempts, his customer had grown impatient and left without saying thank you. Kel didn't blame him. He was frustrated too. For some reason, every task he tried to complete ended in failure. Machines that should have worked flawlessly kept breaking down, sometimes even injuring people. A delivery drone he repaired crashed into a wall, narrowly missing a child. Another gadget exploded in his hands, leaving burns on his fingers. Cal couldn't understand what was going wrong. Was he losing his touch? Had he become careless? Or was something else at play? That night, as he lay in bed, the humming returned. This time it was louder, almost deafening. It filled the entire room, vibrating through the walls and making the metal tools on his workbench rattle. Cale sat bolt upright, clutching his ears. The sound wasn't just annoying, it was terrifying. It felt alive, pulsating with energy, as if it were watching him. "Stop it!" Cale shouted, throwing a pillow toward the source of the noise. Of course it did nothing. The humming continued, growing sharper and more intense until it felt like needles piercing his skull. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Breathing heavily, Kel stared into the darkness. His heart raced and cold sweat dripped down his forehead. He wanted to believe it was all in his head, but the evidence was piling up. Something was happening to him, something unnatural. Over the next few days, the strange occurrences grew worse. Lights flickered constantly in his workshop, even when there was no storm outside. Equipment malfunctioned without explanation. Once, while welding a piece of metal, the flame shot upward unexpectedly, scorching his arm. The pain was excruciating, and the burn left an ugly mark that wouldn't heal quickly. But the worst part wasn't the physical problems, it was the nightmares. Every time Kel closed his eyes, he relived the moment he spat at Commander Vera's visor. Over and over again, he saw her standing there, silent and imposing, wiping away the spit with deliberate calmness. And each time the dream ended with the same chilling detail. Her visor reflecting not his face, but a monstrous version of himself, twisted, angry, and unrecognizable. Kel woke up screaming most nights, drenched in sweat. He avoided mirrors because he feared seeing that monster staring back at him. Sleep became impossible. Exhaustion weighed him down during the day, making him irritable and short-tempered. Customers complained about his attitude, and soon they stopped coming altogether. Word spread quickly among the locals. People whispered about Cale being cursed. Some said it was karma catching up to him for disrespecting the Black Royal Guard. Others claimed it was Commander Vera herself punishing him with ancient alien technology. Whatever the truth, everyone agreed on one thing: staying away from Cale was the safest option. Even his friends began to distance themselves. His drinking buddy, Jax, stopped inviting him to their usual hangout spot. When Cale confronted him, Jax hesitated before speaking. "Look, man, I don't want trouble," Jax said, avoiding eye contact. "You've been acting weird lately, and honestly, I don't want to end up like you." Cal felt a pang of hurt but tried to brush it off. "It's just bad luck," he insisted, forcing a laugh. "Nothing to worry about." Jax didn't look convinced. "If you say so," he replied before walking away. Alone and desperate for answers, Cal decided to visit an old mystic who lived on the outskirts of the city. The mystic, known as Elder Zin, was rumored to know secrets about the monarchy and its enigmatic guards. Many considered him crazy, but Cal didn't care. At this point, he was willing to try anything. The journey to Zin's hut took hours. Cal traveled through narrow alleys and abandoned districts, places where sunlight rarely reached. The air smelled of rust and decay, and shadows loomed ominously around every corner. By the time he arrived, night had fallen, casting the world in shades of black and blue. Elder Zin's home was little more than a shack made of scrap metal and salvaged wood. Inside, candles flickered weakly, casting eerie patterns on the walls. The old man sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by piles of books and strange artifacts. His long white beard reached his chest, and his milky eyes suggested blindness, or perhaps wisdom beyond sight. "You're Cale," Zen said before Cale could introduce himself. His voice was raspy but commanding. "I've been expecting you." Cale blinked in surprise. "How do you know my name?" Zen chuckled softly. "Names are unimportant. What matters is your story, and the choices you've made." Cal hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Finally, he sighed and told Zin everything: the protest, the spitting incident, the strange happenings since then. As he spoke, Zen listened intently, nodding occasionally. When Kel finished, Zen leaned forward slightly. What you describe sounds like the work of the Echo Gauntlet, he said gravely. A device wielded by the Black Royal Guard, particularly Commander Vera. The Echo Gauntlet, Kel repeated, frowning. What's that? It amplifies karma, Zine explained. If you commit an act of cruelty or arrogance, the gauntlet ensures that you experience the consequences tenfold. It forces you to confront the weight of your actions. Kel's stomach churned. So, you're saying I'm being punished for spitting at her? Zen nodded. In a way, yes, but punishment isn't the goal. Reflection is. The Echo Gauntlet seeks to teach lessons, not destroy lies. Kale buried his face in his hands, overwhelmed by guilt and fear. He had thought spitting at Commander Vera was a bold act of rebellion. Now he realized how foolish and selfish it had been. The more he reflected on it, the heavier the burden of shame became. Is there any way to stop it? Kale asked quietly. Zen paused, stroking his beard. There may be a way, he said finally, but it won't be easy. You'll need to prove that you've changed, that you've learned your lesson. How? Kale pressed. That, Zen replied, is something you must discover on your own. With those cryptic words, the old man dismissed Kel, leaving him to ponder his fate. As Kel trudged back home, the weight of Zin's words settled over him like a thick fog. He knew one thing for certain: whatever awaited him, it wouldn't be pleasant. And yet, deep down, a small spark of determination ignited within him. If this was truly his chance to make amends, he would take it, even if it meant facing his darkest fears. Kel returned to his workshop late that night, his mind racing with thoughts of Elder Zin's words. The idea of the Echo Gauntlet, a device that amplified karma, was both terrifying and infuriating. How could something so abstract exist, and why did it have to target him? He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, judged, punished. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the lights, felt like a reminder of what he had done wrong. The next morning, things only got worse. When Cal opened his workshop door, he found graffiti scrawled across the metal shutters outside. In bold red letters, someone had written, "Karma always finds you." His stomach churned at the sight. Was this some kind of prank, or was it another sign from the Echo Gauntlet? He scrubbed at the paint furiously, trying to erase the message, but no matter how hard he scrubbed, the words seemed burned into his mind. By the time he finished, his hands were raw and bleeding, and his frustration had turned into despair. Inside the workshop, chaos awaited him once again. Tools lay scattered across the floor, as if tossed around by an invisible force. Sparks flew from his welding torch before he even turned it on. The air smelled burnt, metallic, suffocating. Cal stood frozen, staring at the mess, unsure whether to scream or cry. "What do you want from me?" he yelled into the empty room. His voice echoed back, hollow and unanswered. For the first time, Cal allowed himself to admit the truth. He was afraid, not just of the strange events, but of himself. He had always prided himself on being strong, defiant, untouchable. But now, he felt powerless, exposed, broken. As days passed, Cal's life continued to unravel. Customers stopped coming altogether, too spooked by rumors of his curse. Even deliveries stopped arriving. Suppliers claimed they wouldn't risk their own safety dealing with someone marked by bad luck. Without work, Cal quickly ran out of credits. He couldn't afford food, let alone pay rent. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, and exhaustion weighed heavily on his body. One evening, as he sat slumped in a corner of his workshop, Cal noticed something odd about his reflection in a cracked mirror. At first glance, it looked normal enough. But then he blinked, and for a split second, he saw the monstrous version of himself from his nightmares. Its eyes glowed red, its mouth twisted into a sneer, its face contorted with rage. Cal recoiled, knocking over a toolbox in his panic. "It's not real," he whispered, clutching his head. "It's not real." But the image lingered in his mind, haunting him long after he looked away. It wasn't just the physical changes, the burns on his arms, the dark circles under his eyes, that scared him. It was the realization that maybe, deep down, he really was the monster he saw in the mirror. All those years of anger, resentment, selfishness, they had shaped him in ways he hadn't wanted to admit. Desperate for help, Cal reached out to the few people he still considered friends. First, he called Jax, hoping his old drinking buddy might lend a sympathetic ear. But when Jax answered, his tone was cold and distant. "I told you, man, I don't want to get involved," Jax said flatly. "Whatever's happening to you, It's your problem, not mine. But I didn't do anything wrong. Kel protested, though even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. Spitting at Commander Vera hadn't been noble rebellion. It had been reckless, disrespectful, cruel. Jack sighed. Look, Kel, I'm sorry, okay? Well, you brought this on yourself. Maybe it's time you owned up to your mistakes. The call ended abruptly, leaving Kel staring at the blank screen of his comm device. He tried contacting others, an old coworker, a neighbor, but the response was always the same: rejection, fear, silence. It was as if he had become invisible, erased from the lives of everyone around him. Loneliness consumed him. Nights stretched endlessly, filled with nightmares and the ever-present humming sound that seemed to grow louder each day. During the day, Kel wandered aimlessly through the city streets, avoiding eye contact with passers-by who whispered and pointed at him. Some muttered prayers under their breath, crossing themselves as if warding off evil. Others laughed openly, mocking his misfortune. You deserve this, one teenager shouted as Kel walked past. Spit at the guards and see what happens. Cal clenched his fists, fighting the urge to lash out. What good would it do? Violence wouldn't solve anything. It never had. Still, the anger simmered inside him, threatening to boil over at any moment. One afternoon, while scavenging for scraps in a junkyard, Kel stumbled upon an abandoned robot lying half buried in the dirt. Its frame was dented and rusted, its circuits fried, but something about it caught his attention. It reminded him of himself, broken, discarded, forgotten. On impulse, he dragged the robot back to his workshop and began tinkering with it. At first, fixing the robot felt pointless. What difference could it possibly make? But as he worked, focusing on each tiny detail, Kel found a strange sense of peace. For the first time in weeks, his mind wasn't clouded with fear or guilt. Instead, he felt purposeful, almost hopeful. When the robot finally powered on, its mechanical eyes flickered to life. It moved stiffly at first, testing its limbs, but soon it stood upright, looking at Kel with curiosity. Thank you, the robot said in a soft, monotone voice. You fixed me. Kel blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected gratitude, not from anyone, least of all a machine. Yet hearing those two simple words stirred something deep within him. Maybe there was still some good left in the world. Maybe there was still some good left in him. Inspired by the experience, Kel decided to try helping others, even if it meant risking further punishment from the Echo Gauntlet. He started small, repairing gadgets for free for struggling families in his neighborhood. Word spread slowly but surely, and soon people began approaching him cautiously, asking for assistance. Each act of kindness lifted a tiny weight off Cale's shoulders, chipping away at the guilt and shame that had burdened him for so long. Still, the Echo Gauntlet wasn't done with him yet. One evening, as Cal worked late in his workshop, the humming sound returned louder than ever. The walls vibrated violently, sending tools clattering to the floor. A sharp pain shot through Cale's chest, forcing him to his knees. Gasping for breath, he clutched at his heart, certain he was dying. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the pain subsided. Cal collapsed onto the floor, trembling and drenched in sweat. Above him, the lights flickered wildly before stabilizing. Silence filled the room. For a moment, Cal wondered if it was over, if the Echo Gauntlet had finally released him. But deep down, he knew better. This wasn't the end. Not yet. As he lay there, catching his breath, Cal realized something important. The punishments weren't random. They were tied to his actions, his emotions, his choices. Every time he acted selfishly or gave in to anger, the Echo Gauntlet struck back harder. But when he chose compassion, humility, generosity, the pain lessened, if only slightly. It was a lesson he needed to learn, and one he wasn't sure he was ready for. Yet despite everything, Cal felt a flicker of determination ignite within him. If this was truly his chance to change, to prove that he wasn't the monster everyone thought he was, then he would take it, no matter how hard it got. Because somewhere along the way, Cal had realized the truth. The Echo Gauntlet wasn't punishing him, it was saving him. That night, as Cal lay in bed, he realized something important. Helping others wasn't just about fixing things. It was about showing compassion, about giving people hope when they needed it most. And for the first time in years, he felt proud of himself, not for standing up to authority, but for lifting someone else up. Good deed number 3. Standing up against corruption. Cale's final task proved to be the hardest. While repairing gadgets for poor families, he learned about a corrupt official named Councilman Drex. Drex was notorious for exploiting the lower class. charging exorbitant fees for essential services and pocketing the profits. Worse still, he claimed to support the monarchy, using his position to justify his greed. Kel knew he couldn't fight Drex directly. He was just a mechanic after all. But he also knew he couldn't stand by and do nothing. After some thought, he approached a group of rebels who opposed the councilman. They were hesitant to trust him at first, given his reputation, but Kel convinced them he wanted to help. Together, they devised a plan to expose Drex's crimes. Kel used his technical expertise to hack into Drex's private database, uncovering evidence of embezzlement and fraud. Then, under the cover of darkness, he planted the data in a public terminal where anyone could access it. By morning, the entire city knew the truth. Drex was arrested within hours, his empire crumbling around him. People cheered in the streets, celebrating the downfall of a man who had oppressed them for so long. Kel watched from the shadows, feeling a mix of pride and unease. He hadn't sought recognition, but he couldn't deny the satisfaction of seeing justice served. Facing himself. By the time Kel completed his third act, he felt lighter somehow, as if the weight of his guilt had been lifted. The humming sound that had plagued him for weeks had faded almost entirely. For the first time in months, he slept through the night without nightmares. But Kel knew the Echo Gauntlet wasn't done with him yet. The device wasn't just testing his actions, it was testing his intentions. Had he truly changed, or was he still the same selfish, angry man who'd spat at Commander Vera? To find out, Kel returned to the central plaza where it all began. It was late evening, and the streets were eerily quiet. Standing there, surrounded by towering skyscrapers and flickering neon lights, Kel replayed the memory in his mind. He remembered the anger, the defiance, the reckless arrogance. But this time he saw it differently. He understood why Commander Vera had reacted the way she did, not because she was cruel, but because she represented order in a chaotic world. As Kel stood there, lost in thought, he heard footsteps behind him. Turning quickly, he saw Commander Vera herself, clad in her gleaming black armor. Her presence was as commanding as ever, but there was something different about her demeanor. She seemed calmer. "You've done well," she said, her voice softer than before. "The Echo Gauntlet has judged your actions and found them worthy." Kel swallowed hard, unsure what to say. "Does this mean it's over?" Commander Vera nodded. "The punishment is lifted. But remember, Kel, the lessons you've learned are yours to keep. Use them wisely." With that, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. Kel watched her go, feeling a strange mix of emotions, relief, gratitude, and even admiration. For the first time, he saw her not as an enemy, but as a symbol of balance and justice. A new beginning. Over the following weeks, Kel rebuilt his life piece by piece. Word of his selfless acts spread throughout the city, earning him respect and trust from people who had once feared him. Customers returned to his workshop, praising his skill and kindness. Friends reconnected with him, surprised but pleased by the changes in his personality. Yet Kel remained humble. He knew he wasn't perfect. He never would be. But he was determined to keep moving forward. Every day, he reminded himself of the lessons he'd learned, that every action has consequences, that kindness can heal wounds, and that true strength lies in humility. As he worked late one night, repairing a broken hoverbike for a struggling family, Kel glanced at his reflection in a nearby window. The monster he used to see was gone. In its place was a man who, despite his flaws, was trying to make amends. And for the first time in a long time, Kel smiled at his reflection. The city of Cytherian was alive with energy as dawn broke over its towering skyscrapers. The neon lights dimmed slightly, giving way to the golden rays of sunlight that painted the streets in warm hues. For Kel, however, the morning carried a different kind of light, one that shone not from the sky, but from within him. He had done it. 3 acts of selflessness had quieted the Echo Gauntlet, silencing the haunting hum that had tormented him for weeks. But the real victory wasn't freedom from punishment. It was the change he felt inside. Still, Kel knew his journey wasn't truly over. Commander Vera's words echoed in his mind. Use them wisely. She hadn't just lifted the curse. She had entrusted him with a responsibility to carry forward the lessons he'd learned, and Kel intended to honor that trust. Final challenge. Kel's peace didn't last long. Just as life seemed to settle into a rhythm, chaos erupted once again. A group of violent rebels, those who opposed the monarchy outright, began attacking key locations across the city. Their goal was clear: overthrow the government and dismantle the system entirely. They claimed to fight for justice, but their methods were brutal. Innocent civilians were caught in the crossfire, their homes destroyed, their lives shattered. One evening, as Kel closed up his workshop, he heard explosions in the distance. Thick plumes of smoke rose above the skyline, signaling another attack. Panic spread through the streets as people fled for safety. Kel hesitated for a moment, torn between staying out of trouble and stepping in to help. Then he remembered the boy he had saved from the rubble, the family whose heater he had repaired, the rebels who had trusted him enough to expose corruption. These were the people he had vowed to protect, the ones who deserved better than fear and destruction. If he wanted to prove his redemption, this was his chance. Grabbing a toolbox filled with makeshift gadgets, Kel ran toward the commotion. Along the way, he encountered a group of rebels planting explosives near a civilian housing complex. Without thinking, he shouted, "Stop! There are families inside." The rebels turned to face him, their faces masked and weapons drawn. One of them sneered, "Stay out of this, mechanic. You don't understand what's at stake." "I understand plenty," Kel replied, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "You're no better than the people you claim to hate if you hurt innocent bystanders." For a moment, no one moved. Then one of the rebels lunged at Kel, swinging a metal pipe. Kel dodged just in time, grabbing a nearby piece of scrap metal to defend himself. The fight was messy and chaotic, but Kel used his wits instead of brute force. Using tools from his kit, he disabled several of the rebels' weapons, buying enough time for others to intervene. As reinforcements arrived, both Black Royal Guards and concerned citizens, the rebels retreated, leaving behind their explosives. Kel helped disarm the remaining devices, ensuring the building was safe. When the dust settled, cheers erupted from the crowd that had gathered. People clapped and thanked him, calling him a hero. But Kel shook his head. "I'm not a hero," he said firmly. "I'm just someone trying to do the right thing." Commander Vera's approval. Later that night, Kel found himself summoned to the Citadel. He walked through its grand halls nervously, unsure what awaited him. When he entered the throne room, he saw Commander Vera standing beside the monarch, a regal figure cloaked in shimmering robes. Her helmet was off, revealing a face marked by wisdom and strength. For the first time, Kel saw her not as an untouchable enforcer, but as a person.